It's hard to believe that it's actually been a year since I filmed this and built this shed for my neighbor. He uh, he had a bunch of stuff he wanted to get out of his garage, and so he wanted a matching shed that was attached to the side of his big garage and make it look like it was always been there. So I brought in this little Kubota excavator and started ripping out the pretty hard clay. This was November or so, so the ground wasn't too moist or too frozen yet. It's pretty fun running this machine. Um, the reason this video is so old is I've just been so slammed with work that I just haven't had time to edit videos. And plus, I have a little girl now, um, and she takes up some time in the evenings. So I'm just working through the queue now, and I'm going to try to get all these project videos out so I can start making new stuff and I don't feel overwhelmed by the whole needing to edit a million videos. So let me know if you have any follow-up questions on stuff like this, and I'll try to touch on that. The plan was to excavate down about 10 inches, 12 inches or so, level out the dirt, and then put in a compacted fill, and then pour a concrete slab so that he had a nice base for all of his equipment. He was going to store the snowblower and yard tools and stuff like that. Originally, we planned on making it accessible from the garage and making it part of the garage heat and all that stuff, but that was going to get costly. So you can kind of think of this as a freestanding shed that just has one wall being the existing garage. So there I am loading all the fill. It's called Pink Breeze. That's what they have out here in Colorado. It has the fines in it, right? So it's the gravel plus the dust, which as you can see flying all over the place here, and that lets it compact really nicely. I wish I had a dump trailer because I had to haul this out by a bucket. I set up my laser to get the depth just right and rented this plate compactor so I could compact it in lifts. I put down quite a bit and compacted it and then added in more on top and evened out the high points and filled in the low points and got a nice level compacted gravel base. The mountain we all live on it's almost rock at this point. It's a shale, so it's a clay that's almost rock. So while it is a bit expansive, it doesn't move a ton. And so having this nice compacted clay and then compacted fill will seem to be a pretty good foundation for this. And checking the level again, making sure that it's nice and spread out evenly. You'll probably see a lot of things in this video that might not be strictly code or sort of more of a countryman building process. I wanted to do the best job I could, but also we were not gonna make this a super expensive shed. So if it looks like there's some corners cut, it's not out of lack of a desire to do a good job, but sort of try to keep it affordable. We put down a vapor barrier to make sure that moisture didn't come up through the slab and rust anything inside. And I'm checking again the level and starting to build the concrete forms. I realized when I dug it out and leveled out the gravel that it was quite a bit below grade, and so concrete was cheap, or more or less is cheap, to get an extra yard or so. So I built these. They're 2x8 form boards. So it's a much thicker slab than you normally might have. You might do like a 3 or 4 inch slab, and this is an 8-inch slab. So it's not going anywhere. It's like a big raft. I put in all these spikes to reinforce it, One's both down to hold it, and then one's at an angle so that the pressure of the concrete doesn't push the formwork, bow it out, and then you're going to have not a straight line in the front of your slab. That won't look very good. And now cutting some rebar. It's really handy to have that big gas-powered chop saw for concrete or metal. You just crush through stuff like this. Doing, I believe it's an 18-inch spacing on the rebar, a grid. And wire it all together, and with those little black things, hold the rebar off from the bottom of the vapor barrier so that it sits in the middle of the slab. There's my guy I hired to do the concrete finishing. One thing I learned on the hot tub project, which I have a whole series of videos on, is pay for skilled labor. This guy is just so much faster, and he knows what he's doing, and he has all the professional tools. I mean, I can make a concrete slab, and I made that hot tub, but I take a lot longer, and I it's worth it to have somebody finish the concrete. And he put in some expansion grooves there, or to crack control, gave it a brushed finish, and this whole slab is sloped ever so slightly towards the front, so that if there was ever any, like let's say the snow melted off the snowplow, it would have a place to drain out. It would drip towards the front edge and not back into the house. And that's the same reason we brought that vapor barrier up the side, so that there wasn't any moisture infiltration into the sill area. But the whole garage is sort of below the grade anyway, not exactly the best thing. There wasn't really a whole lot of rot, but ideally you would not want your dirt piled up against your lower siding boards and sill, because that's just the moisture's just gonna get in there, and bugs and stuff like that. Pretty nice looking slab. Cut the vapor barrier off and backfill once it started to dry, kind of clean up the site and prepare for framing. I didn't want to damage the stone walkway there. That's why I put down these big plywood boards, just kind of keep the place clean. I framed up these walls off camera in the garage where it was flat, and then I made pressure treated sill boards, I guess you could say, and used concrete anchors to bolt those down. Normally you'd cast in J-bolts to bolt your sill or the walls down, but again, this was an area where I didn't want to line up the J-bolts. I didn't want to do all this extra work for just holding a small 2x4 wall for a shed. It's not bearing a lot of snow load. It's not really an issue. Now, I think I maybe should have cut these ahead of time to compensate for the slope of the slab, but instead I marked a laser level line all around them and then planed down the pressure treated sills to that line, because the slab itself is not level, because you want that water to sheet off onto the front, but I wanted the tops of the sills to be level. And so I removed a wood until the whole tops of the sills was like an even level plane, and that's where I could attach the walls. It's just basic 2x4 construction, bolted into the studs of the garage, and then the same thing with this header. That we found all the studs and bolted the header into the studs. I was wanting to cut into the siding and frame into the garage wall itself, but we decided against the additional expense, and also if for whatever reason they wanted to change this or remove it, it wouldn't affect. You could remove this whole thing pretty much, and the garage would look like it always did. So there's a double header there with the long header lock, timber lock screws into the garage. Here's the front two walls. And once those walls were basically plumbed, I braced them and used the straps to pull the whole place into plumb, and level and true and get everything nice and square. Now we're putting in the header for the two double doors. Perhaps this header should be taller by code, but again, this is, you know, a minimum of expense and a minimum of effort to get a nice shed together. Also, if the header was much larger, either the roof pitch would have to change or the door would be smaller. Putting in all these rafters now. The rafter slope is to match the same slope as the garage roof as it sits. So all those are bird's mouthed in. And then I put these fly rafters with some temporary blocking to get them positioned right, and then this subfascia board, and then I installed the outriggers, which hold those fly rafters out, and that gives a nice wraparound eave that also about matches the dimensions of the eave that are on the existing garage, and put in a little piece of rafter there. I guess off camera I put in all the little blocks that go between the rafters to prevent animals from getting up in there. And now I'm sheathing it with some OSB. Pretty straightforward. And wrapping it with the cheap Home Depot house wrap. More to protect from any water infiltration than any kind of real weatherproofing. We're not insulating this because it's all going to be outside. And then sheathing the roof with plywood. And I used ice and water shield for the underlayment. You know, one roll was more than enough to cover the roof. Now starting some of the basic trim. So I'm using pine boards here for both fascia and the eave boards. Soffit, I guess. And then same thing, building out pine trim around the door entrance, and then marking lines for the siding. So we used so I painted underneath on the fascia so that the drip edge could go over. And then I'm installing cedar siding. Siding was kind of rough. It's crazy. If you don't order, you either have to order the super expensive ultra clear vertical grain stuff that costs $1 million a board, or you get this like knotty, there's holes in it. It's like, it looks like wood chips. But we cut the bad parts out, and I had a little extra and filled any little cracks, and it honestly looks pretty good, I think. We were going to paint it to match the barn. I wish we could have left it raw. I think it looks so good without any finish on it. Now I'm putting in little strips of trim to close up any gaps around the existing trim, and put on the first coat of paint to match the barn trim paint. And here now we're building the doors. So I just built these double doors kind of to match the front of his garage, which has this X pattern on it. Simple. I got the flattest pieces of sanded plywood I could, nailed on and glued on these pine trim boards, and then built this X. And that little jacked piece is not to hold up anything. It's just to clamp that board in there so I could line up the doors and fit them and have something to push against. And installed the hinges and patched any of the holes. Man, I was just working late into the night. I was trying to get this project done, so I just kept painting. And more coats of paint. Painted the inside. At some point during this project, I sprayed the whole inside brown too. There you see all the little nail holes that I patched. And then painting the inside of the door. So yeah, that's a nice shed. He was so happy to have a new place for his stuff, and just cleaned it up, put the fence back together, and that was it.